Almost 19% of the air pollution in Uttar Pradesh comes because of waste burning and landfills. And they're contributing to methane, they're contributing to carbon dioxide. So, by not dumping waste on landfills, you're actually doing yourself a favor because otherwise you have to breathe it in some or the other way.
Today, Chintan is managing 30 tons of solid plastic and electronic waste in Delhi itself every single day.
Yeah, it's probably more than that.
But how did you get to this point?
So we work on waste, we work on air pollution, and we work on building climate resilience. And
How did it transition from the environment to the people? What was the thought?
I think there is no environmental solution without marginal people. Today's conversation should not be about I'm recycling. It should be about I'm reusing. I'm making everything last longer. So the mochi will repair your bag and will repair your shoes. And you have to include mochis in your zero waste model.
I realized only after you mentioned I haven't seen a mochi in years.
Yeah. You know why?
You mentioned that we are suffering more than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So are there any numbers that you'd like to share?
I'll give you an example.
If, let's say, you were to propose a decentralized system of managing waste by a colony on their own, what would be like top 3 things that you would tell them to do?
The first thing I would tell them is
Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to the show. And today we are moving forward with Bharti Chaturvedi. I am Keshav Sharma, your host for the show. And every fortnight, I interview prominent and inspiring personalities from the wildlife space to share all the well-kept secrets of what drives them and what makes their connect with nature. During my conversations, I try to look for some interesting stories that might make you fall in love with the natural world and their craft all over again. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to introduce to you Miss Bharti Chaturvedi. She is a strong advocate for the environment and gender equality. She founded Chintan to help empower the urban poor economically. She has a background in international environmental law and works to protect the planet and support marginalized communities. She has been honored with the Knowledge for the World Award from Johns Hopkins University and writes for the Hindustan Times. In her free time, she enjoys bird watching and reading while focusing on a balanced lifestyle. So without further ado, let me welcome Bharti Chaturvedi.
hi, thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. You have a master's degree in modern Indian history from Delhi University and a master's in international public policy from SAIS Johns Hopkins University from Maryland.
Yeah, I do. I have a degree from SAIS. It's actually located in the heart of DC, while the rest of Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore.
Then why come to India and form an organization called Chintan?
I think there's no question about it. I mean, the whole point of studying is to sharpen your own mind so that you can use your own skills to do what you want to do. It's no point studying, to my mind, if you have to apply these things to boring jobs. For me, an education is a way to do things I want to do. It's a form of freedom.
Can you take us back to the origin story of the nonprofit?
I knew what I wanted to do, but I also was very clear about what I didn't want to do. I really had very little interest in being an investment banker, those kinds of corporate jobs, which are very much the norm. To some degree, they still are. I wasn't that interested in most of the jobs that were obviously on the horizon. I had no desire to take the UPSC exam, although I was under pressure to. So I basically took up the first job that I could find. Well, the first job I didn't show up for. So the second job,
Which was it?
I actually went to India today and they said come from whatever date, but then I didn't show up for it. Don't ask me why. And
Why?
there's really no reason.
Once
I
you
think-
say, don't ask me, then that's the question that
yeah,
you'd like
I
to know.
think partly my mom was very angry and she said you were halfway through your master's and at least finish one degree before hopping here and there. I think young people don't have to do everything logically. And when you're young, a lot of your ideas are just, there's no reason. It's partly intuitive and partly just meh. But then the second job I got was at a donor institution. nobody did much work there actually. It was really run very loosely and nobody worked. Everyone was very passionate about the issues, but everyone lived a good life, I should say. It was a great opportunity for me to understand that part of the development sector and look at the money that was flowing not only to the partners of this organization, but also into the organization itself. And I found the people really lovely, but I found that this was exactly what I didn't want to do with my life. It it was just not for me to have long lunch breaks. And I mean, I love long lunch breaks, but not as a lifestyle. And to have conversations about the world and throw some money here and there and think that it's like such a great thing that I'm doing. I found it kind of pretentious and boring. And one of the senior people in the management also found it unbearable. So then I realized I went for a bunch of job interviews, and everywhere I would say what I was interested in. I had no hope of getting a job that really worked for
What
me.
were you interested in?
I was really, really interested in, for the lack of a good word, underexplored environmental issues. And at that point, I was very interested in materials. I still am. Not only, but I was very interested in the interface of society and materials, and what kind of people actually metabolize those materials. And I was very interested in cities per se, and how cities have their own kind of chemical ecosystems where materials can be metabolized, and the enzymes are actually people's hard work or people's innovation. And I grew up in a very protected world. I lived a large part of my life in Lutyens, Delhi. So I'd never really met those kinds of people on my own. And when I say those kinds, I mean, say, waste recyclers or kabadiwalas and people sitting in Mandoli, which is, northwest Delhi. I was very interested in that world. It was new to me. I knew nothing about it. It kind of really played to my interests and deepened them, about a combination of environment and cities. But I was also deeply, deeply interested in biodiversity. And in the beginning, I thought I would really look at wildlife and things that really stirred me, I should say. But I set up Chintan, and mostly because I couldn't find a job that spoke to me or that convinced me that I would enjoy it. I went to all the big organizations. I got jobs, and I mean, literally everybody said one thing to me, which was, yeah, yeah, of course we'll do this. And right now, to begin the work, we're going to look at, rural farming, and we look at farming. And, farming interests me more today than it did then. And I just didn't want to sign up to something that didn't already excite me. And I'd already worked in this donor organization, and I didn't have many needs, and I saw no reason to leap into my first job. Already wasn't very motivating, and I saw no reason to go into a second and unmotivating job. So at some point, I realized I needed intellectual freedom. I had to set up Chintan, which incidentally I did in my office. I used to get into work at about 6:30. It was open all the time in the morning. And
What do you mean by your office?
in the donor organization where I
Okay.
worked. So it was kind of open most times. And so I walked in there, and so I then started, kind of thinking about the organization, writing the memorandum, thinking very hard, reading other people's memorandums. So I did all that work pretty much in that office on their computer, you know, uh, every morning, say 6:30 to about 8, and then I would do, my own work.
So you got this idea and you started working on this name and the idea. And then what happened?
Well, I actually didn't work on the name because I'm really bad with names. And I drove myself mad. And then at one point I said, look, this is too much. But by the time I'd spoken to people who I felt would be really great advisors to the issue, people with empathy and interest in the environment, but with far greater accomplishment than I had, and in hindsight will ever have. And one fine day, one of them, that was Sanjeev Bikhchandani, now best known for his Naukri.com, he said, what happened? You've taken all our documents and you've never come back. And it's now a year odd. And I said, I don't have a name. And he said, that's just so ridiculous. What kind of reason is that? Why do you need a grand name? Why do you overthink? And I said, well, it's very important. And he said, okay, come to my place today. So he opened Menaka Gandhi's book of names for children. And we went through it. And when we reached C, we found Chintan. And he said, that's good. Let's just close it here. We've already gone through A and B. And that's how it happened.
Very interesting.
It means, according to Menaka Gandhi's book of names, an alternative way of thinking.
An alternative.
And that's why we picked it. Of course, it mercifully came quite early in the alphabet. I don't think we could have picked it if it was like in the latter 5 or 6, we would have burnt out.
So this was how many years back?
About 21 years ago, 20 more than that, about 22 years ago, 23 years ago, yeah. Well, I mean, I had 7 people, including me, who had said, fine, we're happy to be on your board. We had the memorandum. We had everything except the name. And of course, there was no office. And he gave the name. And then another founding member, Ritu, she said, now what are we waiting for? We have a name. So we went to the registrar of societies holding all our documents and printouts. And everything was in order by some miracle. Then they registered us and they took 50 rupees, which was the fees.
The registration fee.
Yeah. And they said, we said, now what should we do? And they said, nothing, wait, and we'll send you a mail. It can take 1 month also, and it can take 1 week also, and it can take 6 months also. So don't
Even
come
more
back.
Than 20 years back, it was email.
Yeah, they sent us an email. They also sent us. They also sent us everything by post, which they would also do today because it's a physical document. So I think they sent it within a couple of months. I don't recall, but it was actually very fast. They did it in a few days. And they were very kind to us because usually people can be either quite mean or quite young, really kind to really young people. But I think we were also very excited about it. And we kept telling them how we were going to change the world. And, I think to get rid of us, they said, okay, they just took our stuff and gave us, those little amounts of tea that they give in government offices. And they were really sweet. And they said, ab aap dono ghar jaiye. And thinking that this is their new passion for 6 months. And then we got everything really fast.
So when it started, what was the founding idea?
I thought we would do very particular kind of research, very narrow research, narrow in the sense around only urban issues, especially linked with environment, especially linked with people, especially linked with materials, which would obviously go beyond urban, but consumption. I was deeply interested in biodiversity, and I thought there aren't enough conversations, and I felt that maybe we should ignite some of those conversations, particularly with younger people in schools, particularly in Hindi, particularly with people who didn't have the kind of access people like me had, even at that point, National Geographic and blah, 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 which people didn't have. So those were the kinds of things I was interested in, but everything changed in a few years.
Today, Chintan is managing 30 tons of solid plastic and electronic waste in Delhi itself every single day.
Yeah, it's probably more than that. But we do.
But how did you get to this point? Like you started with an idea and now you are at a place where you're managing so much waste. And you're not only managing waste, you're also managing a lot of other things which are around this problem. Especially taking care of the families of waste pickers.
So we do it. So we work on waste, we work on air pollution, and we work on building climate resilience. And what happens with waste is we ourselves basically don't manage waste. We enable, empower, and build capacities of waste handlers in the informal sector, help them to get more formalized, and they handle the waste. Very often what happens is they're micro entrepreneurs and they earn a pretty good living from waste. Sometimes we might take a contract, which is not very often, so that gives us A, the ability to create more jobs, B, to showcase what zero waste can look like, because Chintan's work is to implement models on the ground, pick that data up, analyze and tell us what it's saying, and then share that with the world, whether it's through case studies or research or whatever, and influence decision making. That's what we do. So we start from the ground and we go all the way to on the top. Basically, what we've been able to show is that if you don't include the informal sector in work related to solid waste, what's going to happen is that they're going to continue, and you'll have leakages, you'll have poverty, and you'll have a very unfair system. But most importantly, your materials won't circulate in the most efficient possible way. So you should make partnerships with informal sector and formalize them. The other thing we've also shown is that decentralized models are more efficient and cost effective than centralized models and less likely to fail. We've also shown that there are certain kinds of sectors in air pollution, such as municipal workers and security guards, and of course, waste pickers, who are much more impacted health wise compared to you and me because of the nature of their work, which is not only outdoors, but there's a lot of exposure at the ground level, because security guards are sitting in the night, especially in the night where there's inversion, and then they're breathing in more pollution. We've also shown that in the case of urban poor, when you paint roofs white and say the heat stress will reduce, it's not a very useful solution for Indian slums, at least for North India. I mean, India is so many different ecologies because it rains like crazy, and that will get removed. It's very cold, and then you need insulation. Otherwise, people are going to have to burn stuff. And then that's not good for climate change either. Of course, it's not good for human health. All our work is really focused on protecting people, particularly marginalized people, women, children, finding a very Indian solution, which means we fight poverty, we'll use tradition, we'll use traditional cultures, and we'll give environmental outcomes that are positive.
Very interesting. You mentioned that you found in your research that decentralized setups are better than centralized ones. Why did you say that?
So, what happens when it's centralized, all the waste is picked up, and the maximum people will do across the country is to complain if it's not picked up. And then it goes away to a landfill, and then there's that out of sight, out of mind thing. We don't really monitor, we don't really have any incentive to reduce our waste. And landfills are very polluting sites. They are a huge source, I would say. Almost 19% of the air pollution in Uttar Pradesh comes because of waste burning and landfills. And they're contributing to methane, they're contributing to carbon dioxide. They're really a big cause of air pollution because they're always on fire, apart from aerosol particles per se. So by not dumping waste on landfills, you're actually doing yourself a favor, because otherwise you have to breathe it in some or the other way. That's important. And I also think when you segregate your waste and when you compost it locally, there's a certain kind of community pressure to do things correctly. If you kind of burnt all the waste that you segregated, there'd be a absolutely uproar in your colony. And people would say, ye kya kar rahe ho, pagal ho, kabadi ko do ye sab. And also you're able to then involve the waste pickers, because these are very localized actors. They can't go 25 kilometers away. So you're able to find your own solutions, monitor those solutions, and these become pretty good. And if you do them well, then I think at least it's a form of self-care. I mean, we're all putting sunscreen every day. To me, there's no real difference between a decentralized waste system and all of us putting sunscreen. They're just different ways to look after your body and your mind and your health.
Isn't it difficult to scale?
You don't scale, you aggregate. So scale would be if you kind of took 600 colonies waste and handled it in one place. Aggregate would be if 600 colonies were decentralized and then they were a peer network that spoke with each other and tried to do things with each other. That would be different.
Very interesting. So you've set up that peer-to-peer network where
Only
these
in a fractioned way, but waste pickers, yes, are very, very networked. A lot of RWAs don't like to talk to each other and they have such big egos, but some don't. And it's to their benefit that, where I live, it's a very open kind of RWA. Everybody is giving them work, throwing work on their shoulders. And then all the other RWAs they talk to. So it's very useful. They get lots of good ideas.
So what's there to learn for the audience? If, let's say, you were to propose a decentralized system of managing waste by a colony on their own, what would be like top 3 things that you would tell them to do?
The first thing I would tell them is put aside a little money because there's going to be a cost in composting. By the time you come to the composting, you would need that money. It's not very expensive, but it's not zero. Find a lot of vocal volunteers. And I would say start segregating the waste and spend the first 3 months doing nothing but segregation. You may or may not go more than 80%, but don't get disheartened. We can work with 80% and push it to, say, about 95%. Very few people stay at 100%. New people come in. Map what's happening. So map who's actually informally collecting your waste. If there's no one, see if you can find a waste picker. They're all over. Nobody can say that there's no such person. But if you have someone and you say, uska service bada hi kharab hai, very bad, doesn't come on time, we can upgrade them, But also look at the mochis. Also look at zip repair people. Because today's conversation should not be about I'm recycling. It should be about I'm reusing. I'm making everything last longer. So the mochi will repair your bag and will repair your shoes. And you have to include mochis in your zero waste model. And so figure out where they are. Tell everybody about them. The big thing is about having conversations and pushing ideas. So map what's happening. Sometimes they're great practices. There'll be some old Uncle G who's busy composting everything and he loves to grow plants. And, it's quite motivating. It's great if he could become kind of a motivator for others. So I would say map. And the third thing I would be like, don't be scared of composting. Don't be scared of composting. You can do it. It's kind of brainless. The only thing I say is don't start in December and January. It'll be slow and then you'll get demotivated. But you can call me even if you don't live in Delhi. I'll tell you on the phone how to crack it.
Thank you.
It's
Very
brainless.
interesting. Very interesting. I realized only after you mentioned I haven't seen a mochi in years.
Yeah. You know why? It's interesting. Even where we're sitting in Lajpat Nagar, South Delhi. A lot of the mochis have been removed from public spaces where they were because those public spaces have shrunk. Shops have also come up on pavements. I mean, we work with them at Chintan and they say they've really lost their clientele because a lot of it was about visibility. And we're working with them to see how we can give back access to market to them. But it's one of our old traditions and it's a thing that's really green. And I think, we all get so excited and say, oh, this is green fashion and organic cotton and things like that. But I think we before we talk of all of that, we should look at what we did traditionally, We had mochis, we used to take all that leftover food and invent and make something new. So those are the great things that we need to embrace and they're easy to embrace.
Absolutely. Yeah, these days, if something goes wrong with the bag, the first thing you know is you'll go on an online store and you buy a new one before you get the old one repaired, which was not the case when we were young.
I mean, there was no social sanction on this kind of behavior. You're just thrown away your shoes because you've said the heel got, the heels got a scratch and it looks sloppy. They'd be like, go to the mochi and see what he can do. And I've even gone to mochis who've chopped up the heels so that the scratch is chopped off. Why we should think of these things is we're in the climate emergency. A climate emergency that's impacted every one of us. It's not just rich or poor people, but the poor suffer much more. What happens is materials, the way we use materials, whether it's a cell phone, which has all kinds of materials that have to be mined and, transported globally. So you have to repair your cell phone all the time until it's absolutely not reusable, which is why I love what's happened with the new Apple. EU has made them bring out a charger that's compatible with several other instruments. So you don't have to keep buying a new charger. So at least you've reduced something. And as somebody who collects e-waste at Chintan, my colleagues would tell you people throw away a lot of chargers saying they're incompatible. So that's a good thing, I think, that Apple's done. On the other hand, that should not be a reason to go buy a new phone. Just because they've used recycled cobalt. I mean, yeah, great. I hope the next variation will also use recycled cobalt and other good green things. And when my phone, after it's already a few years old, when it gets even older and it can't work anymore, then I'll look at what's in the market. I want to say, don't just keep shopping for green products. Shop only when you need and then look for green products. There's no real green glorious badge that you should wear just because you're wearing some organic cotton dress and you have some vegan bag and a bamboo toothbrush. Because my question is, you could afford all these things. They're expensive. Remember that a lot of people can't afford them. Like they can't even afford food. So it's our job to vacate that carbon space. We should shrink our own carbon emissions so that at least poor people have some carbon emissions. I mean, you and me, maybe we can afford to eat, tofu and extra dal. But for a really poor person, it's only, certain parts of an animal that's protein, that's cheap. And so we should really think of being vegetarian so that our carbon emissions are less, so that people who are poor in our country can use our carbon emissions and be, nourished properly. Because if we're not going to do this for our own country, then who is?
So this is a great segue to my next question. Chintan campaigns for the rights of women, children, migrants, and also those who are marginalized. How did this come into the picture? You were working for the environment and most of your work was around climate. And how did it transition from the environment to the people? What was the thought? And how invested are you in this now?
I think there is no environmental solution without marginal people. If you have a solution that doesn't take into consideration the needs, the visions, the aspirations, the experiences of the poor or the marginal people, Adivasis, then it's a false solution. Because we've all developed differently. Somebody in the Northeast, for example, who's kind of grown up really, really far away part of the country, who's really not had, expensive places like Lajpat Nagar or whatever it is in Bombay or beautiful stores of Ahmedabad. If you don't have access to that kind of shopping, firstly, you don't buy so many things. And you have a very different vision of life and you want stability. You don't want to be flooded out, but you also want a basic lifestyle. So we have no business excluding those voices. For me, there is no solution without hearing those voices. And that's why my environmentalism, and I also bring that to Chintan. And luckily in Chintan, everybody seems to bring the same philosophy of being inclusive. And not just being inclusive, being led by a community, different kinds of communities. So we're led by these kinds of ideas, and we bring our own technical expertise into those. And for us, that is the solution that makes sense for our country. On a more global level, so India is a very unique country, and we have a hugely rich culture that is really relevant to environmentalism even today, even though we've forgotten many parts of it, but many parts of it remain. And it's kind of how we think, right? We don't think twice about borrowing a sari because you have to go to a wedding and you don't really want to buy one. Those are the kinds of social transactions that are also important culturally. And those we have to embrace and valorize so that people see that it's not a pathetic thing कि you don't have enough money to buy your own sari. No, you have. You can afford a new sari, but can the planet afford it? That's India's model. People plus environmental outcomes. But globally, I think it's a very unfair world. In the last year, the climate negotiations at Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, it was agreed that there would be a loss and damage fund because people like us in India, for example, but in general, the global south are suffering much more from climate change than, say, somebody even in, say, Canada or the US. And Yes, I acknowledge that they had wildfires and all of that. Germany had terrible floods. But look at what we're suffering from. And the big thing is, we didn't cause it. We haven't been running cars on petrol since the 50s and the 60s. We've had very frugal lifestyles, huge amount of poverty. Now, our people in the last decade plus are breaking out of poverty. At least let them lead a basic human, decent life. But we can't do it if you don't give us the technologies that are green, and B, if you don't cut down your own emissions, because the planet, planetary boundaries are being crossed every single year. America and India can't consume in the same way anymore. The planet will collapse. It already is. On the other hand, if they consumed less and they gave us both funds as well as technologies for us to become greener, we would fight poverty and become greener quicker, and it would be good for everybody. But that's not happening in this world. There's hardly been any transfer of money from the developed world, which is the wealthy countries, to countries like us in order to, be able to fight climate change. So it's really, really unfair. In many ways, it's climate colonialism that we're seeing as Indians. And that's why I believe that while we should fight the good global fight, we should also find our own solutions. And not only is India doing this kind of work, but we're showing the leadership you would have normally expected from rich countries. Solar Alliance, dekho, biofuels, dekho, we're making global alliances. These are the things they should have done, but we are doing them. I think we'll have to look after ourselves, and we already are. We are doing this, A, because we have the capacity, but B, because it's a very unfair world. We don't want to drown. We don't want other Indians to drown or die of heat or whatever. So we are pulling up our socks in the best way without any external help.
So you mentioned that we are suffering more than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So are there any numbers that you'd like to share?
I'll give you an example, and it's a contentious example. If you look at the look at the western coast of India, it rarely ever had a cyclone, right? And now in the last 3-4 years, we've had 3-4, cyclones. Even if they've missed them, they've still been built up. And that's because the temperatures of the water are rising. These are new things for us. So when you have a cyclone of any kind, you have damage. Who's going to pay for it? People lose all their livestock. Poor people's money is invested in livestock. It's invested in, a house which is semi-pakka. All that is gone. And that's why I say that we're suffering more. Of course, we also have less capacity to fight it. I mean, when you had Amphan, which was in India and Bangladesh, it was the biggest cyclone ever in living memory. But please tell me exactly who came and gave us money. I mean, we had to foot the bill ourselves, but we didn't cause it. Today, a lot of people will tell you that the US and EU and China and then India are emitters. But if you look at per capita emissions, we're really low. And, you look at per capita emissions, not only is it low, but historically we've not made those emissions. In fact, it was India, it was an undivided India that was looted. Our cotton went off to Manchester. It was really our indigo that went away and set off, or was a very important factor in making the Industrial Revolution what it was. That was the real beginning of where climate change began, because, using all that coal and burning all that coal for decades and decades and centuries has really, led us to things like climate change and fossil fuels like oil in the US. These things. So colonialism has made countries rich, and those riches have been used in ways that are further impoverishing the colonized countries.
So another reason why the per capita pollution in India is less could be that we have such a huge population.
Exactly. But our huge population, if we started consuming like Canada, for example, oh my God, we would be over. I mean, the earth would have collapsed a long time back. The fact that we don't is the reason that we're still all around. Countries like India haven't been able to, and now we've taken huge leaps towards things like renewables. But nonetheless, we're on very shaky wicket because we are bearing the brunt of historical emissions today.
I understand. Now, circling back to Chintan and the work that you're doing at Chintan, there are a lot of very interesting programs that you're running, like Scavengers to Managers, Kyari to Kitchen, and a lot of others. So, which one is your most favorite, the closest to your heart, and why?
I don't have a favorite, but I have seasonal favorites. I'm quite fickle. Kyari to Kitchen was my favorite because the fact that 5,000 women teamed up with farmers from our very city, people who we don't think of as, Delhi residents, but they came along and they trained them to grow sabzi, and they actually didn't eat any greens. And then they not only grew those sabzis, but they worked with a nutritionist and came up with recipes. Then they learned to eat and cook and look after their bodies. And it was a form of climate adaptation because nutritional resilience is very important for climate adaptation. Greens, as you know, are a huge source of nutrition, but most also sometimes they were also able to cool their roofs with all these green sabzis, and they grow them on their own. They don't need us forever. To me, it was quite a beautiful project to empower people.
Indeed. I must
loved
tell
it.
you. So when I first read on your website that there is a project called Kyari to Kitchen, I was actually very intrigued because I am also someone who likes to eat a lot of greens.
Yeah.
And I also study about nutrition. So I understand that a lot of people who are working as house helps, they can't really afford.
Yeah.
And vegetables are so expensive these days. But when I went to YouTube and I saw that documentary, the small documentary that you've made, and for the benefit of the audience, I would like to tell them that Kyari to Kitchen is a program where the Chintan team goes to these marginalized families. They not only give them seeds, but they also talk about what this vegetable is, how to grow it, what kind of role this is going to play in your nutrition. And then it's not just about giving them the seeds, finding indigenous, very innovative solutions of how to actually grow them. Because imagining that a slum dweller will grow greens in their slums was something which was beyond me. But when I saw the film and I saw that people are actually doing it and they are growing their own greens and including those greens in their meals, it was really impressive. So that was something that
Yeah.
I think
Well,
you deserve
right
a lot
now,
of.
I'm loving the work we're doing with Climate Sakis. So all these women, it's amazing what they're doing. I mean, it's blown my mind away. For example, there's a woman who's found that on the landfill at Bhalaswa, we do a lot of work there, and she's realized that most of the waste is metallic, but the women don't get the same money as the men. Anyway, they get less money. She set up her own shop with fair wages so that women can get paid equally.
Interesting.
And she's gone through a whole leadership workshop and critical thinking. You think you don't need all these things, but I think for a lot of women, it's just an opportunity not to sit at home and tend to the children and all that or go picking trash, but to actually be paid to think and do all of that. So we have paid stipends, and that's given them the space to critically think of what they can do to make a difference. And they've set this one has just become an entrepreneur.
So she was a waste picker
Yeah.
and now she's an entrepreneur.
An
So has she
entrepreneur.
quit being a waste picker
No,
completely?
she
or-
still picks waste, but she's devoting more and more time for fair prices for women. And it's quite exciting to me because I think all the men are quite horrified who were cheating them all this while. But there's other interesting things. We're working with Respirator Life Sciences. It's based out of Bombay and Pune. They're putting up a kind of light for us based on our previous experiments. It'll tell us how bad the air pollution is. Because women don't necessarily read, they're not literate. If you have a light and it's red, you don't let your children play outdoors that day because then they're going to get sick. And 1 in 4 kids in Delhi have irreversible lung disease. 1 lakh people a day die of air pollution in our very country. So at least let's protect children. And as caregivers, women even lose their income for the day if they can't work because they have to look after this severely sick child or children. we're trying to use innovative technology that is suitable for women. So, like I said, I'm very fickle. I fall in love with new ideas, and then I have to, love the previous ideas less.
But then all those ideas are still surviving and actually thriving, not just surviving. These programs are still there.
Yeah,
Aren't
I
they?
don't think we do things. I mean, we try our best to do things that have long term, shelf lives.
Where do you see Chintan 5 years from now? This is where you are. You're doing a lot for waste management, and the communities that are picking waste are doing amazing work when it comes to research. You have all these numbers that you can share with other organizations and you can help them help the environment. Where do you see 5 years from now? What kind
What
of
I
work?
really hope is we've been training waste pickers, particularly women, to compost, and they're trying to put together their own startup with our help called Magic Mitti for composting. So I'm hoping that will really, really be a huge success and provide jobs as well as fight climate change for lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of women. And I hope to share some of that with other nonprofits or even for profits. But the problem with for profits for me is that I want everything to go to the poor. But what I really also what I hope to do is to really put in a model really soon on 3 or 4 things. One is, what does a climate adapted slum look like? It's not just about roofs. It's very complicated. And it has to be led by women, which is what Climate Sakis is all about. I'm really hoping we're doing a lot of work around sustainable fashion. So I hope you'll see results there. But above all, I hope we'll work more on biodiversity. I do hope that we can nurture lots of other individuals and clubs and NGOs, so that we can pass on not just knowledge, but how to get things done. There are processes, there are blind spots, and nobody should have to reinvent the wheel of an organization as old as ours. So I really hope we can get some money that we can mentor people. I don't believe in this thing that we should work in Karnataka, even if somebody told us to work there. Why should we? Why should we work in Nagaland? We should work with people in Nagaland, and they'll have their own localization, they'll have their own ideas, their own cultural tropes as well as cultural practices, and they should develop a model, but they shouldn't waste their time reinventing the same wheel. Obviously, they should make their own mistakes, but we should be able to help them frog leap. So that's what I really want to do.
So, what I'm observing, there's a common thread in most of what you're doing, which is actually decentralizing everything. And as an organization, as an NGO, also, you would like to decentralize it and help others set up their own thing in their states.
Yeah.
And all of these initiatives also are not where people would want to just come to one place, because when you have a centralized setup, you have a single point of failure. The entire effort can go down the drain if there is something that's wrong with the centralized entity. So this is very interesting.
Thank you. I actually want to, my understanding is that we should learn from our own history in India, and we shouldn't go colonizing other geographies, and extract funder money to go to some Northeast and not even have a relationship with the Northeast. I think it'll be so much more beautiful and meaningful and sustainable to say, look, these are the 3 things we know, and you also know 3 things. And we can handhold for a limited amount of time so that you can frog leap and make your own model that works. And, it may work, it may not work, but life is an adventure, and I think we should live it well.
Well said. So you are the founder of Chintan. You are a writer with Hindustan Times. I read that you are also a birder.
I am.
If you were to pick one of these things, which one is actually the closest to your heart?
Oh, I think birding.
Really?
Yeah, because I love going out into the wilderness. I love writing as well. I love contemporary art, actually, art per se. So if you'd asked me which one was closest and you'd put art into the mix, I wouldn't have known what to do. But in this mix, while I love writing, I think going out into the wilderness really, really is hugely enriching. It's like a mind spa. Birds are just a way to be present in the wilderness. I'm sure there are people who look at grasses and butterflies. For me, it's birds. But it also takes me to other kinds of places. I was in Sikkim earlier this year. I saw Sikkim in ways that I didn't when I went as a tourist. And sometimes, families don't like to go birding. All birders have this crisis if their spouses and families aren't birders. They're like, where should I go and how do I disappear for a few hours in the morning to go birding? And, how do I keep my family semi-ignorant about it or at least happy? It's quite a challenge.
And still enjoy.
And still check out whatever birds. In Sikkim, for example, we went to the most interesting places. Birding usually is a no-frills affair because you have to go to remote locations and trudge at 4:35 in the morning, and you basically don't get very much to eat or drink till about 11:30. You travel light. It's expensive, so you have to be really mindful and try to make it less expensive. But just transport is very expensive, really. But, the glory of being in ecosystems, the glory of seeing your own country in such a different way, in such a beautiful way, I just love it. And it's also a cultural immersion. I also went to Darjeeling this time, and there was a part where I just kept seeing graves of people with Nepali names.
Hmm.
And I was trying to see this bird with my friends called what is it called? The gold-naped finch. And it was only to be found there. And we were walking on this path, and there were graves everywhere with Nepali names. And I was like, why were they in graves? And it made me really think about our relationship with Nepal. It made me think about how borders change and harden or soften, or in many ways, I think borders distort our understanding of trade, of relationships, of so many things.
Did you find out what was the reason, or
Well, I haven't really found a reason that's made any sense to me. But it also seems that people were buried there as a practice after they were also cremated, and the remains were put there. But that's just one, and I've not figured out if that's universal. I read some and I spoke with some people, but it doesn't look like a lot of people that I seem to have met have something that makes sense.
But yeah, I get it. So you were on a birding expedition and you came across this very interesting phenomena that you are still thinking about.
Yeah, well, I'm actually mostly still struck by the birds. And birds also tell us about our beautiful ecosystem. I lived briefly in Pakistan for 2 years, and there was a list of birds that you can only see there. Of course, I couldn't get permission to see many, but it was also so amazing. I once saw this bird called the greenish warbler outside my house in South Delhi on the Peepal Ka Ped. And I was putting pani in the Kari Patte Ka Ped because, I eat a lot of Kari Patta, and that ped has to do well. Otherwise, where will I get my Kari Patta from? And suddenly it calls, and I look up, and there's a greenish warbler. And 2 days later, I'm in Pakistan, and I'm, walking, trekking really. And there's the greenish warbler. And I was जरूर
वही है
नहीं वो तो नहीं है लेकिन वहीं से जाएगा और 10 दिन में तो मेरे ही पेड़ में बैठेगा and then they'll all go down Peninsula India. I said ये जरूर है. And I was like, तुम लोग तो ऊपर नीचे जा सकते हो, हम लोग को तो आजादी है नहीं इस चीज की. We don't have that kind of openness, and it's a moment. So I think birds are not just about they're so brilliant. There are birds that migrate for hundreds of days and then they do it again.
Yeah.
They're so tiny, they're so light. I mean, it really makes you want to protect nature, something as exquisite and magical. On the other hand, birds take you through thinking about history, about relationships with other countries, relationships with people because you bird in groups, and diversity because birding groups are so strange sometimes. You meet people you would never meet otherwise.
Yeah.
People who play golf, I feel really sad for them.
Why?
Because they go to this manicured, pesticide-laden piece of green and they get excited because they see a peacock, and they don't realize that they would see much more if only it was a forest. And then they meet other wealthy people dressed in fancy clothes like them with such expensive golf clubs. And then they all eat shishi food like, a sandwich. And then they behave like real gentlemen.
Is this
and
directed
ladies.
towards someone?
No, I just think of golf like that. And I feel if I was ever a dictator, or if there was a dictator, or even if there wasn't a dictator, if there was somebody who would listen to me, I would say, like, just rewild these golf clubs. And it's my pet peeve because they're always in prime locations.
Hmm.
And I say, just rewild them.
Hmm.
And I just feel bad for people like that. Runners and cyclists, they do other things. I think their experiences are very beautiful and very fulfilling. But golf, come on.
Become a birder.
Or don't be a birder, but at least
Quit golf.
yeah, like don't even quit it. Some policy makers should just finish it.
Come and ban golf.
Yeah,
for good.
just rewild it. Then you can't play. Then you have to play on your chat or in your living room.
Very, very interesting conversation, Bharti. I can go on for another hour, and I had a great time talking to you, getting to know
Likewise.
you, and getting to know all the work that you're doing. And the moment I started reading about Chintan, I had to get in touch with the organization and get to speak to you. And I was so fortunate that you agreed to come.
No, I of course would have obviously agreed. I mean, I like talking to people, but I'm really grateful you thought of us at Chintan. And we're a bunch of really hardworking, impassioned people. And it's nice that someone outside of our circles would like to talk to us. I think we're all thrilled.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.